Hola, bienvenido a este nuevo episodio de EntrePHPEros. Hoy me acompaña Ryan Weaver de Symfony Cast. Este episodio es especial porque va a estar hecha la entrevista completamente en inglés, ya que Ryan es de Estados Unidos. Espero que aún así la puedas disfrutar y si te queda alguna pregunta, puedes como siempre dejar comentarios en el video. All right, thank you very much for being here. I'm here with Ryan Weaver, who is, well, Brian, why don't you introduce yourself? You'll probably do a better job than I will.
Sure. So, hi, my name is Ryan, and I'm from the United States, from Michigan, so far up north where it's getting cold right now. And I'm mostly known in the PHP world for being attached to Symfony. I've been using Symfony and developing with Symfony and helping with the core team of Symfony for 10 or 15 years. And my day job is working on Symphony casts, which are screencasts for Symfony. So very, very lucky to be able to do that. And basically, if you ever want someone to tell you way too much about Symfony, that's me.
Great. That's right. I am also a Symphony fan. I guess the people on the other end already know this from me. But okay, so great to have you here. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start by asking you a few questions that are mostly like the questions I usually ask every guest on the show. So let's start with a simple one. Like, how did you start in programming? Do you like go to college or did you start on your own? What was that?
Yes. Self-trained, which it seems like that's more common in the United States. I'm not sure exactly why. Um, Actually, kudos to my European friends. They tend to be the ones that actually have proper university training, and I usually ask them my complicated questions when it comes to algorithms and things like that. So I started with way back. I started with Visual Basic. I was trying to think of like which angle to get in this, because I mean programming is all about making other things do things automatically. And we've been programming for long enough that you forget that a little bit, but I'm sure everyone remembers that first feeling of, write some code and then hit go and then something happened on the screen. So Visual Basic can do many things, but back then what I wanted it to do was to control different programs on my computer. So you have this computer and you have these applications, right? And like, how amazing is it that you can write code that will maybe click a button over here and then type into this box and click this other button? It was like the coolest thing ever. So I was part of, as kids, we would do that, and we would like write code for America Online, which was the coolest thing back in 1996 when I was coding this.
Okay.
So,
cool.
like probably like a lot of people, just, I started because programming is fun and you can do weird stuff with it.
Okay. Cool. So how did you move from Visual Basic into PHP?
Yeah. So, so, like what, I didn't know PHP existed at that point, but I had this idea. I'm probably 15 years old, and I had this idea that I would start a computer parts store, like wholesale. But all I knew was HTML, and so I thought what I need is every week when this like database comes in of new parts, I need to be able to change the HTML. Basically update the HTML for the website. So of course, like when you're young, you imagine that you are the first person solving problems. Like no one has ever thought of doing this before. So I must be a pioneer. I must be the first person to do this. So I was literally using Visual Basic to read the database and then actually write HTML files.
Okay, cool.
Which, so you think about it, you're like, that's PHP backwards, done the wrong way, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's the wrong way. I was just thinking. I actually developed a pretty similar project at one time, and I believe I even used the Visual Basic also. It was supposed to output HTML, but it was very weird because it wasn't supposed to be for the web, but rather to like combine some news pieces from different sources and into like a summary or something like that. And I seem to recall that the output was HTML, which was pretty weird for the for the time being. But
yeah, you built the same thing, and now you're like, well, that's what PHP would do.
well,
PHP,
sure,
but it's fun. It's funny how you use the tools that are available to you to just
absolutely,
get the job done, and that's programming, right? And
absolutely.
someone that was more knowledgeable than me would have said, like, shaken me and said, "What are you doing? This is the wrong tool." But it doesn't matter if I learned a lot, and
Absolutely.
eventually did learn. I don't remember how, but I eventually realized that I was doing it the hard way, not the
Right,
wrong
right.
way, right? I was doing it the hard way, and I learned a lot, and then I came to PHP and just started kind of playing around with that. And PHP is it's the same thing. Now I can write code and refresh, and things happen on the screen, right? So it still had that magical touch of things. So so I did PHP for years just as a hobby, doing things that were interesting to me. And then the way that I found Symphony is actually kind of a fun story. It was when I was in college, and like most developers, PHP developers, at least back then, this is maybe 10, 12 years ago. So the very, very early days of frameworks. So like most PHP developers at the time, I was creating my own framework, because you do the same problems over and over again. And so you think no one has ever thought of this before. I'm unique in thinking that I have found a solution to this problem. So I start writing my own framework. And one day I went to a cafe, and I had a friend there who was using Ruby on Rails, which I had never heard of
Right.
before. It was very, very early, but um, he he showed me Rails scaffolding, which if you're not familiar, is a really fancy way of a command you run that generates code. So in one command, something like Rails scaffold CRUD, create, read, update, delete,
Yeah.
he created an entire interface around a database table for creating and updating and listing and deleting and all that stuff. And my jaw just dropped, because he had just done 10 hours of coding for me in
Yeah,
one
just
command.
in one, right.
And it was better. It was much better than anything that I could have done. It was much more feature complete than
Mm.
anything I could have done. So from that moment, it was, again, it's like you are doing things the wrong way, or the hard way, but who cares, because you're learning. And then
Right.
eventually you will find your way towards a better solution, if there is one, and you will
Hmm.
have all the more knowledge once you get there, because of your path. So I didn't know Ruby. Obviously, I knew PHP. So I said, okay, can we, like, I just searched, Ruby on Rails for PHP, and I was very, very
Oh,
lucky that Symfony came up.
I
Symfony,
will. I have to say I would have never ever run such a search. Like Ruby on Rails for PHP. Well, that's a very interesting way to approach it.
yeah, it's a funny search to look at. Be like, someone's looking
Yeah.
for Ruby on Rails in PHP. And there was actually one other. I found two results because it was so early. It was Symphony, Symphony 1, obviously, and then there
Hmm.
was one other one which I've never heard of ever since. So I'm glad I didn't pick it, but it had a funny name. It was PHP on tracks. So you have Ruby on
Oh,
Rails,
right,
railroads,
right.
PHP on tracks, like
PHP on
railroad
tracks.
tracks.
Well, now I will have to go and search for it. I never heard of that before.
Yeah, me
But,
either.
okay.
So yeah, so I've been doing Symphony ever since, and it's just like, I was lucky that I attached myself to that.
Cool, cool. All right. So that's great. So you've been like you said you've been contributing to the Symphony core for like well, if I'm not wrong, like 10 years or so.
Yeah, probably something like that. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. That's great. So how did you get involved in the, because it's like taking it like one step further, like for me, I've always been a user of the framework, but I think I contributed a little bit of documentation in the
Oh,
past, or
yeah.
maybe, but it's always been like somewhat intimidating to say, well, am I like good enough to contribute to this kind of because I get a feeling that the Symfony code is really really good. So sometimes it's like, well, how did this work for you?
Yeah, and it can be complicated, and I've been working on the core for a long time, but there are other people that do a lot more work than I do, and even for me, sometimes it's intimidating, like you said, because it is complex, and it is high quality, and it makes sense, right? Like because there's been hundreds and thousands of developers
Right.
working on this, so once you get there, there's been so many eyes have looked at this code, how can I possibly improve it or add something to it? So yeah, so I get that. Um, the way that I started in kind of the like what you're already doing, just as an example, is I started by blogging. So you have a podcast, right? So very
Right.
similar idea, and this is back in Symphony 1, but I just found it really interesting to just blog about problems, solving problems. So, for example, the Symphony 1 form system, I did lots and lots of blog posts about those,
Mm,
and that's just a great opportunity for you to dig deep. Because,
right.
as you know, Mauro, when you teach something, in
Oh
order to
yeah,
have the confidence to teach it, you really need to dig deep. You might
absolutely.
just code you might code a solution because you're pretty confident that's the right way to do it. But if you're going to explain it publicly to someone, that's where it forces you to say, let me just check that one other thing. Let me just dig a little bit deeper to make sure that I'm absolutely right about this spot. So I think
Mhm.
blogging is a great way to force yourself to go really, really deep inside of some part of Symphony or whatever ecosystem you're inside of. And I think that as far as contributing, it's not something that you should. If it's not coming natural to you, I don't think that you should force it. I think that as you dive deeper into something, truly deeper, that should be really be the goal. Dive deeper into something,
Right.
blog, explain it further. Um, Things are going to start revealing themselves to you.
Mhm.
You're going to start to see not maybe not problems, but maybe opportunities. You're going to
Right.
start asking questions like, I see that it's done this way and this way, but it would be really nice if there was another option to do it this way or another option to do this automatically. So yeah, diving deep, and it's really kind of a pure, beautiful thing. Just these libraries, and it's not just Symphony, but many PHP libraries. They are so rich that they really tell a story, and you can
Hmm.
open them up and look inside and kind of see what secrets they have to tell you. And the other thing that I would say specific to Symphony is that Symphony is it's a large ecosystem. So there's the Symphony core, which is actually about 50 libraries, and then there are a number of other libraries that are outside of that. So, for example, those are I work on a few of those. Maker Bundle, that's the bundle that
Right.
generates code for you. That's an outside library. It's much more accessible. It has less eyes, less people looking at it.
Oh, I see.
So there's a lot more opportunity there. Webpack Encore bundle is another one. So there's kind of these bundles and libraries that are around the edge that get a lot less
Mhm.
attention. And if you ask people on the core team, like, hey, I want to contribute to, where should I go? A lot of times they'd probably say, if you could go to this edge case library over here that gets less attention and
Mhm.
and and help with that, that would be great because there's only one person on the core team maybe looking
Right.
at that. So it really needs help. And as far as helping, it's diving in and actually making a pull request, I get it. It's a little bit intimidating. Eventually, hopefully, when you dive in, you're going to feel the confidence to do that. So before that is just uh, we call it triaging, um, uh, which is basically going on issues and pull requests and helping those. So I mean, like when somebody makes an issue and they report a bug, can you repeat it? If you want to become very, very well liked inside an open source community very fast, go onto the issue queue, find a bug that someone reported, and then try to reproduce it, and then put very specific instructions on how you reproduce it up on the issue. I mean, when a maintainer of a library sees that, I mean, that is gold, because now you say, okay, to reproduce this, just run this command and then this command and this command, or just maybe you reproduce it by creating a small project and then pushing that project to GitHub. So then you say, just all you need to do is just look at my project, or just pull the project down, and you will instantly refresh the page and see the error. And that is so huge, because those maintainers, they can probably fix the bug very quickly. Maybe you're not sure yet how to fix it, but you've actually already done the majority of the work by reproducing that thing. That's probably 90% of the time that it would take.
Cool. All right, thank you. That's really interesting for somebody looking into, breaking into open source contribution. That's a very, very good path to follow. I have to say, I might even do it myself sometime in the near future. Okay, so now I want to take you to somewhat more uncomfortable kind of questions or outside of your comfort zone. And so the first question I would ask is, have you ever you mentioned this PHP on tracks framework. I don't know what that's all about, but I'm thinking about there are other alternatives to Symfony, like Laravel is a big one, or I don't know what else is out there. Like Send framework, now it's called Laminas, I believe. So have you ever tried other frameworks? Or
I think that my advice in general for people is to choose a major framework. So unless you really know what you're doing, don't find a framework that doesn't have a big user base, because you're not going to be able to find answers on Stack Overflow. And then the other one, if a team was asking me what framework they should go with, I would ask them what the language is that most people have a background in. So this is more like if a company came to me and said, we're looking at Symfony, but most of their developers have Ruby experience.
Right. Yeah.
I'd say, I love Symfony. You should use Symfony, but really you should use Ruby on Rails, because
absolutely,
because they're both just such high quality. Just so I think Symfony is the best, but is it worth retraining your entire team? Probably not. So stick with that. So in the PHP world, then it comes down to Symfony or Laravel, and Laravel does have a bigger user base, but they both have a big enough user base that you're going to find the solutions for them. In the Symfony world, I have said that my title is basically Chief Laravel Idea Stealer, because what Laravel has, what they have done incredibly well is just come up with wonderful ideas and wonderful developer experiences for problems. Just they'll think of, for example, hey, people need to be able to use queues so they can kind of do work asynchronously, and they will just design a system from the ground up that just has a beautiful developer experience for it. So they have done really, really well in lots of areas for those. And then what we've done, because we were really a step behind, Symfony was always built to be very kind of object oriented. We follow object oriented principles. If you want to become a really good engineer, programming in Symfony is a great path, because it forces you into all these really nice design patterns. But they got a head start on those great ideas. So what we've done is basically kind of take those ideas and re-implement them in Symfony. And so what I really love about Laravel is just how those great ideas. I don't love the implementation. That's not to say it's wrong. It comes down to a personal preference. I prefer really sticking well in the object-oriented land. And so our job in Symfony is, how can we have just as good of a developer experience and make it just as easy to send emails or put things into queues, but while sticking with these sort of ideal object-oriented principles. And I think that we've made a lot of progress with that, especially since
Oh,
Symphony
absolutely.
4. Because you also, the problem, the tricky thing with Laravel is that is from a competition standpoint, is that Laravel allows you, they don't make you, I want to be very clear about that, but they allow you to cheat from my point of view
Yeah.
when it comes to object-oriented
I
things.
feel, I feel the exact same way.
Yeah,
It's
and it
funny.
doesn't make it bad. It's just they've chosen to say you can do it. You can code perfectly, object-oriented in Laravel, but you don't have to. Whereas Symphony
Right.
kind of says, no, we are going to keep you and make sure that you don't wander
Yeah.
off the path, don't stray from the path. You're going to have to code perfectly. So there were some extra challenges for us to make it just as easy, especially for beginners, to
Right.
develop in Symphony without having that kind of cheat step available in the middle. And I think
Yeah.
we've done that, but it took us a
Oh
few years
yeah.
to do.
I think my feeling is Symphony 4 was like a complete game changer. Well, of course, the Symphony 2 was an actual
Yeah.
game changer because it was a complete rewrite and everything. But for me, the introduction of Flex, that was huge. I mean, that really made a difference. And nowadays, I I mean, Symphony used to be considered like, well, yeah, it's good, but the learning curve is way
Exactly.
too steep and anything like that. But my feeling nowadays is that that's completely over. Like you can get a Symphony application up and running in 5 minutes, and yeah, of course, eventually you will want to go deeper and really understand what's behind the curtain and everything. But when it comes to rapid development, I think, well, it's a perfect tool to use. So anyway, now I believe you kind of answered this, but I still want to ask you, like, why would you choose PHP nowadays, having all these fancy alternatives like Node.js or even Ruby or Python or anything like that? What makes
Mhm.
you like prefer PHP?
Well, I mean, obviously for me, it's my background, so I'll try to back up and kind of answer objectively for somebody that doesn't have a background in anything specific. I think that Python and Ruby on Rails and PHP are all very good. PHP still runs the web, so at the end of the day, as far as talking about where you're going to find the most Stack Overflow answers, you're probably going to find a lot of Stack Overflow answers for Python and for Ruby, but like PHP is still the king in that. Like they have the vast majority of the web. You have massive numbers of applications. You have like Drupal. If you need a CMS, you've got Drupal. Drupal is built on top of Symfony. I mean, it's just such a rich ecosystem. And honestly, like Laravel, who is our main competitor, I put competitor in quotes
Yeah.
because of what I'm about to say, which is that they have reinvigorated PHP. And I think that you could have made an argument 5 years ago that sure, PHP still runs the web. They still have the vast majority of the websites, but the energy and the young people are going elsewhere. And
Yeah.
I think that Laravel has flipped that over and changed that. They have brought a whole new generation of PHP developers and life into PHP. And as far as from a language perspective, and I know that you already know this, Mauro, when you hear people maybe saying bad things about PHP, it's really PHP probably 5 or 10 years ago that they're doing that
Right.
on. I mean, the
Absolutely.
pace of the language. I mean, we have return types, property types. We have not all, but basically all of the like really rich object-oriented features that you would expect other languages to have. So yeah, Python, Ruby, all great, but PHP, has all this energy inside of it. It still runs the web. The language is mature. There's tons and tons of tools, Symfony, Laravel, Drupal, and many, many others behind it. Now, the one that I didn't answer was something like Node, um,
Mm.
which mostly I would guess I would put Node in the category, the same thing, right? It's a great language. I use it all the time, for example, for JavaScript, for wiring my JavaScript dependencies, Webpack, things like
Right.
that. But as far as for web development, yeah, sure, it's also another great option. But one thing I would say about that is that this is not exactly what your question is, but when you think of Node, you also think of front end frameworks. And hey, if you develop Node on the back end and you're using React on the front end, like that's a pretty good fit there because those are both JavaScript, right? They're a little bit different, back end versus front end, but they're both JavaScript. So you could imagine this world. You can imagine an argument where somebody says the world is going to all JavaScript, because why would you have a different language on your back end versus a different language on your front end? And I think that something that the Ruby on Rails community and also the Symfony community right now, and really Laravel in a different way, has been embracing is a kind of a new paradigm of, or an old paradigm of web development, which is a technology called Turbo, which you've probably seen, Maro, if you haven't used it yet. But Turbo is basically it's a JavaScript library, but what it allows you to do is create a traditional application, with templates and full page refreshes, all those boring things that we've done for 20 years. And it transforms that into what feels like a single page application. And it's very simple. When you click a link on your website, it intercepts that, the JavaScript library does, and it then makes an AJAX request instead, and then just takes the HTML from your back end and puts it on the front end. And it sounds like, okay, but is that really as fast as the front end framework? We'll get into the details of it, but it actually it really changes how your application runs on the front end, and so yeah, it is actually very, very fast.
Right.
So a long way of saying that, even 5 years ago, I would have been like, yeah, this argument of having Node in the back end and JavaScript on the front end with a front end framework, it kind of makes sense to me. I think it'll take a long time for us to get there if we ever do. But with this new Turbo paradigm, unless you're building something that you would really say this is really a very, very rich application, this is a website, but it almost feels more like a phone app. Unless you're building something like that, I would say don't build a single page application. Just build a traditional application.
Right.
And then at that point, Ruby on Rails, Symfony, Laravel, they all do that super duper well. Symfony also is really, really good at APIs.
Right.
Also a great tool called API Platform. But as far as that traditional app, you can have that traditional app and all those things that you love about it and are comfortable with it and still deliver a very, very rich user experience. So to go back to your question, Maro, why wouldn't you choose PHP with that? I mean, like, just all these benefits, and you can still have that single page app experience, just building in PHP on Symfony or Laravel or whatever. So that little thing right there with Turbo makes me more excited about developing than I have for years, and it's been super, super fun to work with.
Cool. All right. So I have a lot of questions, the regular questions, but I want to really take the opportunity to ask you about your particular, about your business. How did this Symphony Casts start, and how did it become your main? Well, I guess that's your main living, right?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So yeah, well, tell me about it.
Yeah. So my day job is Symphony Cast. So if you are a supporter, thank you. It's absolutely ridiculous that I get to make screencasts about Symphony as my day job. It's a dream come true because I'm just a Symphony nerd. So I get to learn it and teach it all day. So it's amazing. It originated from when Symphony 2 first came out. There was a lot of companies that were asking for in-person trainings, which we did. But of course, in-person trainings are very expensive, and so it was just a way for us to fill that gap. The individuals that just want to spend a little bit of money, not a lot of money, because of course flying a person is expensive, to be able to learn Symphony. So that's where it started, and we've been around for maybe 6 years or something like that, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to work on. We have a team of about 5 people total. It's a joy to be able to go to work every day and dive into Symphony and teach these things. One of the things that we were able to do and continue to do, and we're very lucky that it worked because it was just a big guess, was that we were able to make all of these scripts and code blocks for every tutorial. They're free below the video. And this is me because I'm not a business person at all. I'm an open source guy. So what I want to do is create things and then give them away for free.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife actually wants to have a business where we can pay for food. So there's
that makes sense, probably.
Yeah. She's the brains behind the business. So this is a compromise where I said, well, if we, hopefully people will actually subscribe and for the video, and then for everyone else, we can give them the script and the code blocks for free, which like feels good for my open source side, because we don't want to create open source is very tricky, especially these days, when it comes to how you fund things, where the money comes from. As more and more businesses use open source and take advantage of open source and make money off open source, you end up with just a few people that are doing all of the work and aren't necessarily being paid. It's a difficult thing that we are figuring out right now, and getting people to take responsibility for it. Fortunately, SymfonyCast is a kind of a bright spot in that. It is a spot where individuals are contributing money, and what we're able to give back thanks to that is a rich series of documentation on Symfony in video and also in script for free for everybody, that can just help the entire ecosystem. We also we're very lucky to be able to give back to Symfony itself. It's not something we talk about a lot, but a portion of our income goes directly back to support Symfony itself. So SymfonyCast is one of the ways that Symfony supports itself and supports the developers that work on Symfony full time.
That's great. So yeah, I mean, I've been a consumer of some of your material. Well, actually, that's how we got to connect in the first place. So yeah, thank you so much for the work you're doing. I think it's great, and I'm really glad it exists, because I am also, like I mentioned at the beginning, like a fan of Symfony, and I'm also doing my best to evangelize people on the usage of Symfony. So cool. All right. So now I would like to ask you this: like, what are the tools that can be missing from your working environment? I'm really interested in asking this to different people, because that's actually how I got to learn about new stuff. Like for instance, I know I'm a kind of a newcomer to Docker. For instance, I've been hearing about it for a long time, but just recently I actually put it to good use. And I see many people out there who maybe aren't really using the how can I put the best tools for working. Like for me, it's very clear the lack of usage of Xdebug among PHP developers. And
I was just thinking about Xdebug. Well, and I am one of those people that doesn't use it.
Oh, really?
But but not for a good reason. So I use Xdebug. I have it installed, but that's not. Okay. I know that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about the step-by-step debugging.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, for me, that's something I can't live without. But it's funny, because I see so many people in the PHP world who don't even know that this is possible. I mean, it's fine if you choose not to use it. And I would like to know the reasons why you would make such a choice, but at least you know it exists, and you consciously decide not to use it. So that's what this question. This is one of my favorite questions in the interviews, because I get to learn about whatever, the frameworks, the tools, the static analysis. What are the tools that you use?
So I don't have a good reason for not using Xdebug. It's almost like what I would say is, there are so many great tools out there. You should learn about them, but of course, but don't feel bad about learning them little by little. It's like tomorrow with I'm very similar to you in Docker. Technically, I've been using Docker for 5 years, probably, but in very, very small ways, and I still only use it in small ways. It's been around for a long time, but it's complicated.
It's complicated.
I have other things that I need to do. So it's, I little by little, I get into it, and I also wait for the ecosystem to improve and make it easier for me to get into. So Xdebug is actually one of those things where I've just never taken the time to set it up.
Oh,
So there's no no excuse beyond that. It has never made a big enough priority. Now for me, there's a side thing that I sort of I'm a little different. I sort of can't rely on it because what I do is I make tutorials, and I need to use the tools that my users have. So
right.
I have a
Okay.
weird thing where I purposefully need to not use a tool because I know that
Cool.
not everyone will have it. So
Very,
that's
very
an
interesting.
extra
Mm.
reason that I haven't been motivated to do it. But I think that, and you probably know better than I do, Mauro. I think it used to be much harder to set up
Oh yeah,
Xdebug.
that's exactly what I was going to mention. Like Xdebug 2, and I don't think I ever used Xdebug 1, but Xdebug 2 was a real pain to install and get up and running. I was like every time I had to do it, I was like, oh, again, please. But I have to say that Xdebug 3, it's a complete a completely different thing. It's a bliss actually to install it and get running.
There you go.
Um,
You got me convinced. I'm going to try to get it set up, and then at the very least, when we do our Symfony 6 tutorials, I can mention it. Like, hey, this
well,
is
yeah,
easy
I
to set up.
mean,
You should do it
it's
now.
really easy to set up, and in PHP Storm, the connection is like the whole thing is very, very well polished now. It wasn't like that at all, but now it is.
Yay.
So
Which is why nobody ever used it in PHP, which is why nobody knows
yeah,
about it. It's kind of
probably.
suffers from this reputation of being hard to set up.
Yeah, well, I have to say I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, for me, it was like the upsides of having it working completely compensated for the hassle of getting it running. But
Yeah. If you're
yeah.
watching this, you should set it up. Go do it.
All right.
All right. So for my tools, I mean, you mentioned the main one, which is PHP Storm. It's, but that's almost you don't have to use it, of course. But if you're looking for tools and you're not using PHP Storm, then you're not doing yourself a favor. I don't use that many tools, but probably the one that impacts my development the most in a positive way would be the Symfony binary.
Okay.
That's not one that everyone uses, but that if you are going through the Symfony documentation, they're going to tell you to download this Symfony binary, just a standalone Symfony executable. And it does a number of different things, but the most important thing it does is it helps you run a local web server. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's nice, but not a big deal, right? We can run local web servers in PHP, right? PHP-S.
Yeah.
But anyways, if you use this Symfony binary, then you don't need to worry about Nginx setting that kind of stuff up locally. Mm-hmm. But the really useful part of the Symfony binary for me is it has Docker integration. Okay. And so I use Docker in a very light way. And this is the way that you will see in the Symfony world. Of course, you can do whatever you want with Symfony. But for example, if you read Fabian's, the lead developer of Symfony, you read his book, The Fast Track to Symfony, which you can go online and read right now. He tells you about this specific approach. So the approach is that you have PHP installed locally. So you don't build PHP inside of Docker. Okay. And this simplifies things. You need to install PHP locally, so that's harder, I guess. You need to actually make sure that PHP is installed locally. But it simplifies things because you one of the complications with Docker is that you need to, if you have PHP inside of a container, you need to kind of have PHP sharing your project files. So if your project files are on your computer and you need to kind of set up volumes so that your PHP can see your project files. In Mac, this can cause performance issues because there's like file sharing. So it gets a little bit complicated. So with this way of doing things, your project is on your local computer, like normal, nothing weird. PHP is on your local computer. Very, very straightforward. The only thing that you have Docker do is build your services like MySQL, database. or
All right.
Elasticsearch, or RabbitMQ. So anything that you kind of usually run as a service in the background would be built via a Docker container. So what the Symfony binary does is that you can have a little Docker compose file, and I'll talk about how you can get this in a second. But you have a Docker compose file that describes, for example, a database instance, and then you can use Docker compose to start your database. So now you have this container running somewhere with a database inside of it.
Right.
And what the Symfony binary will do is it will detect that is running, and it will expose the connection configuration to that as an environment variable that Symfony then automatically reads. So if you use like a modern version of Symfony, in order to configure your database, for example, there is an environment variable that you need to set. Usually we set this in .env, a .env file, right. .env.local. But in theory, you could set a real environment variable to your connection string. So the end experience basically ends up being this. You just say Docker compose up, and then you refresh the page, and your website is connected to the database. Because Symfony binary has noticed you have a database running and has taken its connection parameters, exposed them as that environment variable that Symfony already uses, and suddenly your Symfony application knows to talk to the database that is inside of this Docker container.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, my only concern there would be because my how can I put it? My motivation probably to use Docker in the first place is to avoid these issues where my client is using PHP whatever 7.4 and I am developing with PHP 8, and then there are these clashes. So that's why I would probably simply say, well, for this particular project, I want to make sure I'm coding with PHP 7.4. So that's how I would put the PHP inside the Docker container. Actually, what I used to do until very recently was to create virtual machines like Homestead or whatever, something like that with background to isolate the environment for each particular project. But I mean, for me, it happens to me that I work on many projects at the same time. So if I don't have them perfectly separate, I can get into a lot of trouble.
So so I think that setting up a full Dockerized environment with PHP inside of it, like it takes a little bit more work, probably maybe a little bit more like initial expertise, but it is the most isolated way of doing it. I don't go that far in mine, but that's the way. I mean, that's the proper way to use Docker.
Yeah.
About the like versions of PHP, the way that the Symfony binary solves that, it's still not as pure as I have a bunch of containers over here for this project that run in PHP 7.4.2. But the way that solves that is you can choose, when you're inside of a directory, you can choose which PHP binary on your computer to use. So if you're using a Mac like I am, you can like brew install PHP 8, PHP 7.4, PHP 7.3, and then there's just a little bit of configuration that you actually store inside your project that tells the Symfony binary to use the 7.3 version or the 7.4 version. Yeah. So still got to make sure it's installed locally. So that's the compromise, right? You have to install
absolutely.
Locally, but then you kind of get this Docker light or Docker easy, Docker simplified environment.
Well, for me, it has. I have never like bumped into this performance issue, probably because I don't use Mac, so I never really ran into that problem. And I have to say also, the instances where I use Docker like in real life were always for CLI kind of applications, not really complete websites. And that is something I'm toying with to have something like an Apache or Nginx like forward requests to different Docker containers. I haven't really put that up yet. I'm a little scared to do it actually, but I guess it will be someday.
This is a great example, right? Like that's something that is clearly like interesting to you, and you are at some point going to invest the time to figure it out. Right. And once you do, like, that's great. And if that's something that is not interesting to you or you don't have the time, then in general in development, don't feel bad about it. Go with
Oh yeah.
the simpler solution. We deploy to Symfony Cloud, which is a platform as a service. So I really don't like servers and deployment and that kind of stuff. Just as another example. And so our deployment pipeline is a YAML file. We
Right.
just have a YAML file, and we absolutely love that because I don't want to learn all those other things. But other people are different, and they do love those things, and they want to go deeper into those and have more control, and that's great too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that we have so many options out there that it can be overwhelming sometimes, but I think you're on the right track with your approach to kind of learn as needed. And yeah, I, yeah, I think I have something of that myself. Sometimes I get like too deep into these rabbit holes, but yeah, I think you're more on track than me on this one. All right. So with all these things, like we said, with all these new things going on, like you mentioned this terrible thing. How do you keep up with tech these days?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I don't chase the new things. Um, you've probably uh, because you've been programming for a while, like I have, Mara, you've probably recognized this also. If a technology is good and is going to be good, it tends to keep coming back to you. So what I mean is, if you hear about something one time, don't worry. It's okay to ignore it. If you hear about it a second time, it's okay, still ignore it. If you hear about it a third and a fourth time, then you can maybe start to give it a little bit of attention. I remember like way back when Git didn't come out, because Git has been around forever. But we used to use SVN for version
Oh yeah.
control, and all of a sudden it was like somebody whispered, "Git, have you heard about Gits?" And I was like, ah. But you heard it over and over and over again, and then so eventually you say, okay, I'll look into it. For me, I keep up on things. Mostly on Twitter. That's how I would see what new technology is. But again, I'm ignoring it as long as I possibly can. And I think there's a fear of missing out, that there's
Yep.
going to be this really cool thing. I ignore things for a long time, and by the time I do get to them, I still feel like I'm pretty early on things. Which I guess is a way to say that new technology is very loud and people are excited about it. So it's probably that you're hearing many people who absolutely love it, but it's still a very, very small number of people that use it. So by the time you get to it later, there's a good chance you're still pretty early in the system. So yeah, don't worry about it. Almost make that technology convince you that it's worthwhile by having it, having you hear its name many times.
I love your mental framework that you should you kind of just formalized a lot of things I had going on in my head, like I love this concept of consciously ignoring something. That's huge. I think and I think I have been doing this myself, but I never really made it like a conscious choice. And I had the exact same experience that you mentioned with SVN and Git, and I had this huge fight with a former boss of mine, where she wanted to, like, we had all this history of using SVN, and me, and at the time I was running a team. We were like 5 or 6 developers, and we got really good with SVN and branching and everything. So our whole workflow was really smooth. And she was like, "We need to go to Git. We need to go to Git." And I was like, "Why?" I was like, "Give me one good reason why we should, throw this away and move to Git." And she was like, "Well, because it ultimately was, well, because every cool kid is doing it."
Yeah.
And I have to say, nowadays I did eventually ditch SVN for Git, And I have to say, I kind of still miss the simplicity of SVN. Git is like way too complex sometimes. And well, I like the concept of the pull requests and that kind of stuff it's certainly better than what SVN had to offer. But still, I think as a general way of thinking of this, I'm going to make this my takeout probably from this call is this conscious ignoring of technology. As a matter of fact, I think I will use it for my newsletter. I really like that concept. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right.
You probably eventually used Git because eventually that boss kept coming back and eventually did have good reasons. So you did get to ignore for a while, but if Git had not been a good technology, she would have come to you one time, maybe twice, and then it would have just like gone away, right?
Yeah, that may be true. In the in this particular situation, we never really switched. I eventually we both left the company, so I don't really know what happened later. I did adopt Git for my personal usage, but and yeah, I'm fine with it now. But still, it was a funny story. So, all right, we've been like talking for quite a while now. Very interesting conversation. I would like to ask you. Well, the final question is: where can people find out more about you?
Symphony casts. Go there, check it out, please. And if you want to talk, you just leave a comment below any video. We reply to all those. It's a great spot to ask questions about the videos. And also Twitter. So I'm my name in reverse, Weaver Ryan everywhere. So Twitter, and also Symfony has a Slack channel. And if you ever have a question, I'm fairly busy, but I get back to everybody. So you can message me on Slack, and I would love to hear from you. It's nice to actually have contact with people, especially if you're excited about contributing or something like that. I will help you out. So
excellent. That's great. Well, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to be leaving these links on the video description. And so again, is anything else you want to share with the audience, or just speak your mind? This is your chance.
Gracias por tenerme. Yo puedo hablar español un poquito, pero gracias por dejar que yo hablo en inglés para esta entrevista, ¿verdad?
Sí, muchas gracias. Gracias por el esfuerzo también del español. So again, it's been really nice having you here. Thank you so much for devoting your time to it and sharing all of your knowledge, your wisdom and experience.
This is fun. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, so this is it.